Article 1. The 3,000-Year-Old War by J.S. Stuart. The origins and continuation of the war between Israel and the Palestinians. If you want peace, you need to understand the dynamics. The 3,000-year-old war, actually around 3,200 years, is probably the longest war in human history. The war we see so graphically on our screens between Israel and the Palestinians, raging for 3,200 years. But the story begins a lot further back even than the Bible, which documents the first part of the war between the Israelites and the Philistines. And so exactly how and where did all this begin? Actually, it began nowhere near the current location of the war, but was far to the north, about 7,500 years ago, although the exact timings cannot be confirmed. It's true that many of the great human migrations emerged from Central Asia, but this one began further west, around the location of what is now the Black Sea, 7,500 years ago. The Black Sea wasn't black, and it wasn't a sea. It was in fact a very large freshwater lake, around the shores of which was a blossoming series of agricultural communities, very much based on the social transformations taking place in Mesopotamia. Yet, where Mesopotamia had the opportunity to build great cities such as Eridu and Uruk, cities that formed the basis of the first empire, creating writing and counting and government, the habitational lands around the Black Sea would not have the same opportunity because at around 7,500 years ago, the land bridge between what was the Mediterranean and that very large freshwater lake crumbled dramatically, likely because of tectonic earthquake shifts, and the solid rock that had held back the sea became the Bosphorus Strait, allowing seawater to flood into the freshwater lake at a tremendous volume. Estimated 10 cubic miles of seawater per day poured into the Black Sea, equivalent to a loss of 1 mile of shoreline per day, very quickly submerging approximately 39,000 square miles of land. Within a very short space of time, the water level within the lake increased by around 120 metres, losing vast areas of shoreline, completely uprooting and dispelling what was likely the heavily populated fertile crop-producing regions around the lake. This was the area of the Great Flood outlined in the ancient Epic of Gilgamesh, where the land was flooded and boats were built to save lives and livelihoods, later to become the biblical flood of Noah and his ark. And so began the first mass migration. The people of the north and west of what is now the Black Sea moved north and west. However, the people to the south and the east largely moved south to the fertile lands that were common knowledge due to long existing trade routes. Some of these people, of a common language, moved into what is now northern Iran. Some moved further south into the Canaanite hills of the Levant to mingle with the early farmers already in place, creating a new and dynamic hybrid society, a new civilization, together with their closely related Phoenician cousins in the north, from what is now Lebanon and northern Syria in the north, all the way down to Egypt and the Nile Delta in the south. A thriving mass of agriculture and increasing innovation and trade sitting on the ancient overland transport routes from east to west, epitomized by cities such as Jericho. Geographically located as these people were, with several early empires claiming competing rights over this land, these people could clearly see the strengths and weaknesses within the competing empires. And so, when the opportunity arose to invade an ailing empire around 4,000 years ago, the chariots and the horses streamed from the north into Egypt, which the Egyptians came to know as the invasion of the Hyksos, the Heka Kasut, the rulers from a foreign hill country. This was the area of Joseph and his colourful coat, as well as the famous agricultural canal called Bar Yusuf. However, the Hyksos control over Lower Egypt did not last long, and they were expelled back north once more about 3,800 years ago. But importantly, not completely expelled, because some remained where they had been for generations in the Nile Delta. And so was ushered in a new era of Egyptian growth, but not all were happy. At about 3,400 years ago, the pharaoh Amenhotep III was a very wealthy man, yet increasingly he was spending much of his time and effort counteracting and combating the growing power of the priests, so much so that he might even have been in a state of undeclared civil war. Into this environment came his son, Amenhotep IV, who, as soon as he gained power, decided to banish most of the old gods, along with the mass of priests. All he needed was the one God, visualized by the rising sun each morning. Amenhotep IV changed his name to Akhenaten and declared a new era of Egyptian culture and religion based on the one God that was the sun, with the pharaoh being the divine link between heaven and earth. And from this he began to build the center of his religion, the city of El Amarna. However, as he had banished the priests of the old gods, who could he employ to be scribes and bureaucrats of the new empire? He could not trust the Egyptians and their old ways, whom he knew were conspiring against him and his divine rule. So he turned to the remnants of the old enemy of the Egyptians remaining in the northern delta, the Canaanite Hyksos, renowned for their writing and organization. It is true, this angered many Egyptians, because after all the Hyksos were the enemies of the Egyptian civilization. But Akhenaten could see no option as he remodeled the empire with El Amarna at its center, with the one state religion being the worship of the sun god. Grateful for the assimilation, the Canaanite scribes accepted this new religion wholeheartedly. Yet trouble was brewing, as this concentration of imperial effort and cost and power was allowing the destabilization of the fringes of the empire. Dissent was increasing, so much so that the military aligned itself with the banished priests of the old gods, and they deposed Akhenaten, killing a number of his children. But one of them escaped, Egyptian name son of Moses, son of Akhenaten, and was taken north to the land of Canaan by the fleeing Hebrew-speaking scribes, escaping Egyptian wrath and certain slavery. And so came the era of Ramses the Great and the biblical 10 plagues, as, after perhaps 2 or 3 generations following the death of Akhenaten and the slavery of the remaining Hebrew scribes, the one remaining direct link with Akhenaten and his religion and the sun god, Moses, was persuaded to return to Egypt, to hasten the escape of the Hebrew-speaking slaves and return them to their ancestral homeland in the north, the Exodus, carrying with them the last remnants of the Akhenaten religion, where the divine were emblazoned with sun discs around their heads, and heaven, the realm of the sun god, was beyond the skies. The resultant fusion of societies and perceptions on the edges of the Egyptian influence led by Moses integrated with the existing Hebrew-speaking people of the north, created a new dynamism and a new national identity based upon their renewed religious perception of the world. These people no longer saw themselves as Canaanite, nor Phoenician, nor Hyksos. They were something different, as for the first time in their history, their diverse groups were forged into one language, one people, one future. Yet the world was dynamic. Over 3,200 years ago, following prolonged geological activity and climatic shifts likely leading to regional food shortages, then localized political instability, the old regional empires were once more under pressure, especially as various people from around the Mediterranean region began to move. Not only did they begin to move, but importantly, as a matter of survival, as many of them were mercenaries, they began to attack and carve out for themselves new territories from old empires. They knew the weak points and the easy targets. From trading and mercenary activities, this violent shift in population became known as the Sea People, hastening the downfall of much of the existing stable order, like dominoes falling, known as the Bronze Age collapse. Formed in a loose confederation, there were 9 groups of people from different parts of the region. From the central Mediterranean area, there was one group of people in particular called the Peliset, who around 3,200 years ago actively attacked and settled along the shoreline of the eastern Mediterranean, forcing the existing Hebrew-speaking people inland as refugees. Through time, the Peliset would become known as the Philistines, almost perpetually at war with the biblical Israelites over land both laid claim to. Eventually, the Philistines were defeated by the Babylonians around 2,600 years ago and temporarily lost from history. Lost? Not gone, because with the Babylonian capture of Jerusalem a few years later, resulting in destruction of the city, the mass expulsion of the Jews and the Babylonian captivity, the region was effectively cleared of Israelites who were forced into slavery in Babylon. When this happened, the remaining Philistines, over time with Arab inclusion, began to emerge as Palestinians and quickly succeed in taking over the farmland vacated by the Babylonians. These early Palestinians were a scattered population, still under the power of a foreign empire. The Babylonian captivity would last approximately 2 generations until the Jewish captives, around 50,000 of them, were released by the Persians. Yet 2 generations was a long time, and on return to their homeland, the Jewish survivors undoubtedly found that homeland to be now occupied by the people they had been fighting against for centuries. Known as the Palestinians, and with Jerusalem still largely in ruins. With little strength to retake their homeland, many of the Jewish survivors spread throughout civilization further afield than Israel. But importantly, the Jews who decided to return to Jerusalem had the might of the Persian Empire on their side. Around 2,500 years ago, the Greek historian Herodotus documented an area of Syria called Palestine, between Phoenicia, Lebanon, northern Syria, and Egypt. However, it is around this time that enough Jews had returned to Jerusalem that, with the aid of the Persians to rebuild the city and to rebuild the house of God, the Second Temple was constructed, which lasted for several centuries until Roman times. And it is true that the level of assimilation of the scattered Palestinians was such that they were almost completely absorbed into other groups. For around 200 years before the Greeks and then the Romans, the region was a part of the Persian Empire, ruled over by autonomous Jewish governors, and as such once more became a centre for Jewish activity. The different groups, whether they be Jewish or Arab or Persian or Phoenician or Syrian, all mingle freely, yet not without rivalry and conflict. Apart from the existing empires, a number of the different groups and factions within these groups manoeuvred for control throughout the region, and at times open conflict. With so many groups, each with their own agenda, it should be no surprise to learn that this was a fractious region prone to uprising and costly conflict, at times against the existing Israelite Persian government in the region, fighting over land and access to trade routes, of which there were many due to the continuing seafaring prowess of the Phoenicians and the inland trading capabilities of the important Israelite kingdoms. As always, the Israelites struggling to retain sovereignty due to geographical location on the verge of a number of important superpowers. This fractious existence became too obvious to ignore when the region passed through Greek control and then of the Roman Empire, marked by a number of violent uprisings to establish Jewish independence. At around 1700 years ago, the Roman rule was handed over to Roman Byzantium rule, and the heavy taxation to pay for constant wars against assassinated Persians. During this time, Jewish traders and scholars became prevalent throughout the entire region, even into East Africa, with growing discontent due to the constant heavy taxation. However, this discontent rapidly gained traction at around 1400 years ago, with the rise of the First Arab Caliphate and the later imposition of Islam. The coming centuries would see Jewish activity and population fluctuate dramatically at the hands of Islamist Arabs, followed by the Turks, interspersed with Crusades from the West, who all wanted to lay claim to Jerusalem and the surrounding land. Adopting and adapting to Islam, the Palestinians gained prominence within the region, although still very much under the rule of foreign empires. The situation continued until the 20th century, when the Ottoman Empire collapsed and Jews began to re-emerge in ancient Israel from areas such as Europe, but to find the land in the hands of the Palestinian Arabs, those descendants of the Pelasite people who had merged into the Philistines, the biblical enemies of the Israelites. Undeterred, seeing this as an opportunity to regain their ancestral homelands, the incoming Jews began to buy up land following World War I and the dissolution of the Ottoman presence. This progressed rapidly after the horrors of World War II, so that by the mid-20th century, the scattered presence of now legally Jewish lands interspersed by remaining Palestinian lands, although no state called Palestine, was ready to declare independence. In 1948, this sparked an all-out war between the under-equipped fledgling state of Israel and 5 surrounding Arab countries. The approach of these 5 Arab armies created a wave of Palestinian refugees and established refugee camps, which were to take on a permanent fixture on the land and in politics, leaving areas of now depopulated land to be assimilated into Israel. And so, in the spirit of entrenched antagonism from a long time ago, the ancient wars between the Israelites and the Pelasite continues. Each group claims the land. Each group claims the right to defend with force against the enemy. And as the world becomes increasingly involved in this ancient conflict with no apparent end, the closer the world lurches towards widespread conflict. Indeed, that biblical Armageddon from which there will be no winners. Why? All because thousands of years ago some people were just trying to survive. History may be a study of the past, yet it is a study so we may learn lessons. Lessons are not being learned from this 3,200-year war. Because of this, we are all in grave danger. And the study of history shows us very clearly that borders change, people change, there has to be change. The Arab countries surrounding Israel, watching the current disaster unfold, they all understand there has to be change. And in all truth, there cannot be a forever war, which serves no one's purpose except for the extremist lunatics who do not want a future. They only want blood and will only ever want blood, with perpetual cycles of inhumanity buoyed by vast amounts of diverted foreign aid to fuel the cycles of hatred and violence. Ancient excuses and ingrained barbarism are not fit for a modern world wise enough to seek to learn lessons from the past. There has to be change. The 3,000-year-old war cannot be allowed to merge into the 6,000-year-old war.
A series of articles by J.S. Stuart. Number 1. The 3,000-year-old war. Number 2. The aging process. Number 3. AI, the first level of control. Number 4. AI informatics. Number 5. The continuing AI revolution. Number 6. China. Number 7. Data. Do we understand what's about to happen? Number 8. Disability. Do we pretend to care? Number 9. Fear. Number 10. Hypnosis, eroticism for women. Number 11. Hypnosis, managing stress. Number 12. Inspiration in the age of AI. Number 13. Islamic Republic of Iran, the enemy of civilization, written before the latest war. Number 14. Why do women often prefer more mature men? Number 15. Program Rescue. Number 16. Rewriting history. Number 17. Tao. Number 18. The art of seduction. Number 19. The audacity of hope. Number 20. The essence of negotiation. Number 21. The future of warfare.